the position is more serious than we had originally contemplated. We have got a new situation in Rhodesia that we have not previously experienced. Namely, that the terrorists were operating across the border, an easy border which is simply a line on a map. And so they were able to pass backwards and forwards with facility.
Rhodesia's Prime Minister Ian Smith admitting the seriousness of recent guerrilla raids against his country, raids which last month prompted him to close the frontier with Zambia. Most of the guerrilla action has happened here along Rhodesia's northern borders, a sparsely populated region that's ideal terrain for conducting a guerrilla campaign. During the past 6 months, bands of armed guerrillas have been crossing the border and carrying out Mau Mau-style hit-and-run raids against isolated white farmers in the fertile tobacco-growing district of Centenary. Rhodesia has in fact been fighting a guerrilla war on its northern and western borders for several years. During the 1960s, its well-equipped security forces had little difficulty in dealing with poorly armed bands of guerrillas who made the mistake of engaging the troops in pitched battles. Today, the guerrillas are well-armed and well-trained. They've changed their tactics to hit and run, and the security forces are finding them far more difficult to deal with. The bloodiest guerrilla action in recent months occurred in Centenary during the Christmas holidays when several whites were killed. Archie Dalglish's farm was one of several hit by rocket attacks. A visiting farmer and his daughter, who'd fled from an attack on their own home only the night before, were badly wounded. Since the attacks, many of Centenary's farmers have made their own arrangements to deter the guerrillas, and their farms are now bristling with arms. We asked Archie Dalglish if he thought raids would continue.
I do.
Well, what's the future going to be for you and your family?
Well, it's just a case of being ready when they do come. They're fly-by-night. They're cowards. But what really made my blood boil was to see a little girl with her stomach or abdomen blown open just through senseless terror. And that goes for everybody in Centenary. They would have done the same as what I did. Fortunately, I got a couple of 4 shots in, but anybody up here would have done the same, whether it was Scotchman, Englishman, Irishman, or Welshman.
So you're quite ready to take up guns and defend yourselves?
Exactly. My gun is ready. I'm waiting for an import permit to get some more terrorists in. But they won't grant that, you see.
Do you agree with the action of the Smith government in closing the border?
I do, very much so. Should have been done years ago.
Do you think he's been tough enough?
No, it should be tougher.
What would you like to see him do?
Close the border completely. No flow of traffic or tourism, or they've allowed tourists to go through. Now, they could be the main carriers of information, that sort of thing.
How about reprisal attacks across the border?
I'd go up tomorrow.
A few weeks ago, Chris Clainhands, another Centenary farmer, described the guerrillas as useless. From a hospital bed, he described how one night of terror changed his opinion.
At about 5 to 12, between 5 to 12 and 12, I was awakened by a automatic shot that was fired right at the window at my head. Our bed was standing against a large window, and I was awakened by the shot that was fired right at my head. I won't say it was fired at me, but it was fired into the room, probably to break the glass so that they could throw the grenades in.
You knew you were being shot?
Well, then I realized immediately with a flash and this terrible noise, you know how big a noise these automatic weapons kick up when they are fired. I was awake immediately, and I started rolling off the bed, and I shouted to my wife to roll off the bed. And I stayed on the side of the bed and to see if she was rolling. I didn't know at this time that they had chucked in a grenade and that the grenade was actually on the bed between us. And I saw my wife rolling off, and she fell off the bed, and I fell off, and I was hit by this grenade as it exploded. At the time, I didn't know that my wife was hit. She was actually killed by the explosion of this first grenade. It exploded more on her side of the bed than mine.
The guerrillas who are terrorizing the centenary farmers are mostly exiled black Rhodesians operating from Zambia under an umbrella organization called Frolisi, the Front for the Liberation of Zimbabwe. Nobody knows just how strong they are, but they appear to be winning over some local Rhodesian tribesmen to their cause. Mr. Smith says this is achieved largely through intimidation. But one border police official has admitted that converts are also being won by persuasion. The guerrillas cross the border and ask the locals to point out a white man they dislike. The white man's farm then gets hit, and the locals are impressed. The government's response has been to impose community fines and arrest 200 people for allegedly helping the guerrillas. According to Mr. Smith, witch doctors are another important element in the undermining process. In a television broadcast in January, Mr. Smith said that the guerrillas had found a few witch doctors of doubtful character and of little substance and succeeded in bribing them onto their side. These were then used to good effect in misleading local tribesmen into accepting that the terrorists were worthy of their support. Joseph is a typical witch doctor, part medicine man, part magician. He also attends a Christian church on Sundays. Today, Joseph is diagnosing the cause of a headache using a buck's horn as a kind of stethoscope. His treatment is to bite off the head of a live cockerel and pour its warm blood on the troubled spot. Joseph deals with at least 25 people a day, and many travel hundreds of miles to see him. He's regarded with a mixture of fear and wonder by the people he serves, and he has immense influence over them. When asked if he would give help to the guerrillas, he replied his purpose in life was to cure people, not to kill them. The final act of the cockerel cure took place in the crocodile-infested Hunyani River. The sacrificial bird was consigned to the waters, and the sickness washed away with its blood. In Zambia, President Kaunda reacted angrily to the border closure, accusing Mr. Smith of aggression in the United Nations. The relationship between his government and Rhodesia has been one of muted hostility ever since Mr. Smith declared UDI over 7 years ago. On several occasions since, President Kaunda has called for the overthrow of Mr. Smith by force. Although he doesn't share the guerrillas' communist ideology, he does support their black nationalist aims, and he's therefore tolerated their presence on Zambian soil. Closing the border meant Zambia had to reroute much of its export trade. Nearly all the country's foreign exchange comes from copper exports, half of which are usually sent by rail through Rhodesia to the port of Beira in Mozambique, a trade which is keeping Rhodesia Railways from bankruptcy as well as benefiting the Portuguese who collect the port revenues. President Kaunda would like to stop shipping his copper by the southern route through Salisbury to Beira altogether, but that's not likely to happen until the Tanzam Railway, linking Lusaka with Dar es Salaam, is completed in 1975. Meantime, the balance of Zambia's copper exports is moving out by road to Dar and also along the Benguela Railway to Lobito Bay in Angola. Mr. Smith came under some criticism in Rhodesia for closing the border. The opposition parties described it as a political blunder. Moreover, Mr. Smith acted without consulting either Portugal or South Africa, which exports $65 million worth of goods a year to Zambia through Rhodesia. The feeling in Pretoria was that Mr. Smith had created more problems than he'd solved. But in Rhodesia itself, there were many ordinary citizens who were prepared to support the Prime Minister's action.
I think he was completely right for the very simple fact that with, I think I'm right in saying, about 80,000 tons of copper per month being produced, part of which goes through Lobito, part of which goes through Dar. They haven't got a snowball's hope in hell of handling the balance of copper that formerly went through Rhodesia. Not a snowball's hope in hell. They just cannot handle it.
I would say roughly 50 to 60% fall, but whenever it comes to any showdown, 75 to 80% will always follow Smith. We haven't got anyone better at the moment.
I think they had a very difficult decision to make. I wouldn't like to have to make it. I can understand the reasons for them taking the decision they did, but whether economically and politically it will turn out to be the right decision, only the future will tell. I wouldn't like to guess.
How seriously do you feel threatened by the situation? There are reports that the terrorists are operating within 75 miles of Salisbury, that Zambian troops are firing at Rhodesian security forces. To what extent does this worry you?
Well, quite honestly, not very much. I don't think I'm being complacent here. This has been building up for a very long time. We have lived with this for a great number of years in varying degrees. And certainly, at the moment, there is more of it, and we are a little, perhaps, more conscious of it than we have been. I have tremendous confidence in our security forces and in the people who lead them, and I feel that we may have a worse time now before it gets better, but that ultimately we can cope with this situation. Our problem really is that these people are being fed by people from outside. I've always maintained that if Rhodesia and South Africa had been left, I'm talking now about 10 years ago, to solve their own race problems, Rhodesia particularly, none of this would have arisen. But we are up against more than just the terrorists on our border.
How much support do you think the local Africans in Rhodesia have towards these terrorist groups?
Very, very little. This is a thing that we seem unable to persuade our critics. Even the same thing with the Pierce Commission. Intimidation is an absolute fact. I know this, I have spoken to my own servants. These are simple people, they are lovable people in many ways, but they are very easily terrified. And the circumstances that they are living under on the border areas, where they are being threatened by men, desperate men, armed men, would persuade anybody to join them. And I am convinced that the majority of them are not against us, and in fact that there is tremendous goodwill amongst the races in this country, far more than we are given credit for.
So, do you think Rhodesia does have a long-term future? You don't feel threatened in the long term?
I wouldn't like to commit myself to that, because we are up against forces that are almost too great for us possibly to withstand. I'm now referring to communist pressures from the East, which I think in the end must prevail. But I would say that Rhodesia will see out a good many more years, I hope my lifetime, and I certainly hope for the future of Africa as a whole that the so-called white racists, as they call us, are able to maintain what I call civilized government here for a good many more years. And I don't mean only for us, I mean for our African people.
In times of political stress, it's not uncommon for white Rhodesians to raise the specter of a communist plot to take over Africa. Mr. Smith himself has said the communists aim to gain control of southern Africa because it's rich in minerals and controls important sea lanes. He believes that the guerrillas, who call themselves African nationalists, are simply tools of Moscow and Peking. There are those in Rhodesia who think that Mr. Smith's brand of direct opposition to Zambia may eventually be self-defeating, that it will be more likely to encourage a polarization of attitudes, possibly even driving President Kaunda into increasing support for the guerrillas and perhaps pushing Zambia into the communist camp. But Mr. Smith does not agree.
If anybody is trying to tell me that if we hadn't taken this action, that the Zambians would have pulled out of the OAU and would have become sweet and reasonable and everything would have been fine, I don't believe this. I'm sorry. I think we are indulging in wishful thinking if we believe that by behaving reasonably we are going to get these people to see reason. They have made up their minds. They say openly and publicly, and have done so on many occasions, that they are only going to use the white South as long as it suits them. Meanwhile, they are preparing to divert their attention and their traffic elsewhere. And as soon as these alternative arrangements have been made, that will be the end of their association with the white man in the South, who they openly say is their enemy. Now, what can you say under these circumstances? As far as the suggestion put forward by my questioner is concerned, I just don't believe that this argument holds any water at all. I believe that we are bluffing ourselves. We are allowing the communists to go on leading us into believing that in the end they're going to play the game. And meanwhile, they get us to give a little way, to give a little more, to give a little more. And every time we give, they advance. So this is the problem that you've got to face up to. How does it affect the ultimate situation as far as their ultimate objective is? And that is to remove the white man and his civilization out of the African continent.